Mind you that there's absolutely no specifications regarding security, none whatsoever. You could legally have a Windows 95 box with the first version of Internet Explorer and an open ADSL line with no NAT, and that would still be a legal voting machine as long as the buttons were a certain size and it resists vibration. And now the Dutch environment comes with a lot of e-voting is perfectly safe, just trust us. And the Ministry of the Interior in 2004, in response to this Irish thing, said, in contrast to elections using paper ballots, the count of an electronic election cannot possibly be wrong, so there's never a need for a recount. And then he also said, oh, but the Irish situation is so different, and the software is specially made for Ireland. It's not even comparable to the Dutch machines, even though they're based on the same technology. So all of these Irish security problems that you've read about, they don't really apply here. No need to worry. Another disturbing thing that's happening in Holland, or that was already happening before we started getting involved, is internet voting. In Holland, we have a sort of another structure of government. We have the municipalities, the provinces, and the national government, and then, of course, the European Parliament elections. But we have a completely different body called the Waterschap. And those are the governmental bodies that deal with dikes and pumping the water out. And those are actually the oldest democratic structures in Holland. And supposedly they're the reason that Dutch governments until now have been fairly stable, is because we needed governments to be fairly stable, and we needed governments to take decisions that would only benefit us 20 or 30 years from now, because otherwise we get wet feet. So they've built a system called RIES, R-I-E-S, and that's an internet voting system. It's actually kind of neat, because everybody gets a DES key, and everybody gets to vote. Everybody gets to vote, and then afterwards they publish a file, and everybody can use their receipt that they got, their cryptographic receipt. It's all generated on your own computer using JavaScript. But the cryptographic receipt that you got from the server can then be used to verify that your vote is counted correctly. And they've calculated all the hashes for all the possible votes that you could do before giving you that DES key. Elections as sort of an alternative to polling stations. For a while they would say, yeah, you can still go to the polling station, but they would use RIES as an alternative way to cast your vote. Now, for me, that's a definite no-no, and for a lot of people around me, that was a definite no-no, because you want to see under which circumstances people vote. If you don't, any power relationship, any control relationship in society will be abused. The standard example is husbands and wives, especially from macho cultures, but there's lots of other examples. There's student unions or student clubs, or any employer-employee. Any relationship in society can be abused in the sense of, hey, let's go vote together, really? So you want to monitor the circumstances under which a vote is cast, and it's really to me, it was heartbreaking to see people of the Ministry of the Interior sort of trying to negotiate away that point. Yeah, but that's sort of important, but other things are also important. The secrecy of the ballot is not protected enough in this particular case, because the DES keys are then sent to you as something you can enter. So I think it was converted to ASCII without the zeros and the I's and the... So converted to some typable form and then put in some security, printed inside of a security envelope and sent to you. So somebody, of course, has to have all this data to be able to send you that key. Now that somebody is, they didn't disclose who it was, but it's probably SDU, because they have a lot of experience with security printing. And so at one of the technical gatherings where they explained this system, I had to ask them, so let me get this right. You're giving somebody the keys that they can use to calculate what everybody else has voted. Because with that key, you can calculate all the possible votes, and thus see what that person has voted with that control file that they post at the end of each election. And you're giving that to a printing press where everybody has security clearances, meaning Hundreds of people there depend for their livelihood on the intelligence community. That's interesting. And then there's even though they have published some of the software really late, like a day before the election, because they weren't done yet. Scary, huh? But they have used it this year as a replacement for the postal ballot, which is also a terribly insecure system which doesn't have secrecy of the ballot protected well enough. So as a replacement for the postal ballot, they've used it this year, figuring there wasn't much criticism because the other system was pretty cooked also. But that was also happening before we started. And then, as Frank said, last year we did our talk. And we basically said that because we lost the privacy war, it's become ever more important to hang on to democracy, because you cannot ever let it slip anymore. Because you've basically lost any method of regaining it, clandestinely in any case. And because all of us could use a conflict we could win. And then also some of us got to vote on the SDU NuVote machine. I personally, in March, for the municipal elections this year, I was first confronted with this machine, and I pressed this button, and it was just the eerie feeling. All of Holland has been e-voting forever and ever. I think 60% of the country was already e-voting in 1990. So Holland is pretty much 100% e-voting, and Amsterdam was the last major city to not have it. And then they switched and they bought SDU NuVote, or they hired SDU NuVote to do the election, and that was sort of the last straw for a number of us. I remember Barry, who you all know from his lockpicking things, and myself, both independently from each other, being fumingly mad at the polling station. And being faced by people that didn't understand. Yeah, but they're tested, don't worry, it's all good. And in fact, he was even told at his polling station, well, if you don't trust it, then why don't you just not vote? Goodbye, sir. And then a lot of strategy also formed before and during Datenspuren in Dresden, the conference where a lot of people that I know from Germany met, and we sort of talked about, we can't let this happen, we must do something. So Barry and myself basically initiated a campaign in the Netherlands called Wij vertrouwen stemcomputers niet. Don't try to pronounce that. It means we don't trust voting computers. And it has been very successful despite the hideously ugly domain name that you see over there. Okay, our campaign strategy has been to go easy. The Dutch public is 99% e-voting. So we didn't want to say, we must go back to paper, so instead we said, we must have a trustworthy system, be it paper or be it something with voter-verified viable paper audit trail, meaning tickets that you can actually see and then put in the voting container. But we must have something that is trustworthy. Germany is different, of course, because the large-scale rollout hasn't happened. We have 10,000 machines for 17 million people, covering the entire country, basically. And Germany has less than 2,000 machines, I think, for a much bigger country. And we completely skipped the issue of internet voting because not many people knew about it. There hadn't been huge press. And there wasn't any time to do the research right. An interesting aspect is we call them voting computers. Whereas legislation and NADAP and government, everybody called them voting machines. We figured it was really much easier for people to understand that this was a computer if we called it a computer. It's not a machine. A machine is like a washing machine or a typing machine. You open it up and you see what it's doing. You see the little lever that goes between the key that says A and the hammer that puts the A on the paper. Here, this is a box that just runs software, and it could run any software, and you have no means, without actually taking out the software and disassembling it, you have no means of seeing what that software does. We gambled that we could dictate what it would be called, and it's worked. Meaning, right now, mainstream media almost never uses voting machine anymore. It's always voting computer. We'll see why that is later. I started doing a lot of research in May. We still were like 4 or 5 people. There was a very small group. There wasn't any really well-formed strategy, but I figured I would start doing research, and I knew a person that could do FOIA requests. I'll get to that later. Informationsfreiheitsgesetz, with us it's called WOB. But I started doing research. I started figuring out how it really worked. And you'd wonder why, because we already knew that it was bad. Gut instincts told us that we were completely insecure. We felt that it was plain wrong. And the everything is fine facade didn't have too much in the way of building behind it. But of course, you need facts. You can't convince people if you don't know precisely what's wrong, if you don't know, if you can be beaten on facts. If anybody from the Interior Ministry or anybody from one of the manufacturers, from NADAP, can say, well, but you didn't know that in 98 Parliament already passed such a thing and we've already dealt with that. So you must know it all. And if you can't prove it, if you can't show the dead body, then there has been no murder. We've gotten to a point where we've been right on so many occasions, and we've said so many things that have proven to be true, that by now the entire Dutch press trusts us on this issue and completely distrusts NADAP, the Interior Ministry, and everybody else involved. And a lot of that is very hard work by a large group of people. There's like 10 of us updating the website, putting new news articles on, updating parliamentary documents we can find, really making sure that everything we say is actually backed by facts and is true. I talked a little bit about freedom of information legislation. We call it WOB, you call it IFG here in Germany. It's probably called differently in all sorts of other European countries. Get to know that legislation. No matter what you're doing, if you ever want to find out what your government is doing, use that legislation to its maximum potential, because it's incredibly powerful. It's like casting the demon spell. It's like, you see them, the 27B/6, you see them freeze in place, and oh my God, we have to give them all the documents. We used it extensively. The German law is slightly more limited. It's especially more costly. But apparently it's only more costly if you then in the end decide to actually get the documents. So there's all sorts of ways around it, I hear, but that's something you definitely need to be up to date on. This is some of the questions that you can ask. Well, I'm glad that's actually readable. All the documents needed to create another document, or other documents we need to create an overview. So there's certain phrases that you use to make sure that you get the broad palette of documents. We write, our current Freedom of Information requests are like 5 pages, 4 or 5 pages of small print. And you have to be slightly careful with this because you are causing a lot of work and it can make you a lot of enemies. I've actually learned since doing my first FOIA requests that with a day of writing a Freedom of Information request, within 1 day, from sitting down wanting to write it, to actually bringing it to the post office to get it sent there as registered mail, with that 1 day you can cause 3 months of work at whatever bureaucracy you're sending that to. So it's asymmetric warfare to the max. But I've also since learned that there's a huge crowd of people that do this all the time. Which I'm not sure I approve of. I think that what we're doing is really important, and I do this because I think it's really important. And there's lots of people, I found out that there's people, not lots of people, but there's a few people out there that just do this because they're annoyed with some part of government, which I'm not sure I would advocate, because we don't want to lose that legislation to trolling. It's really important legislation. It tells us what our government is doing, and that's a privilege that we should use wisely, I think. All the documents that shed light on the exact logistics of getting machines to and from polling stations. So you can actually make your government tell you, well, who do you hire for security, and where do you store them, and what do you do, and what's the brand of the alarm system. As you can see, documents dealing with the last, these are just some example questions. The fourth one is really interesting because it's all documents and correspondence which was created as a result of my previous request. Emails and documents. Of course, there's headers that say documents can also be emails and formal requests and quotes and